This week in the conversation, I have the privilege to welcome author Sarah Dayan Mueller from Chicago. We're going to be talking about her fantastic book, A Home in 100 Places. Interesting conversation. But before we get into the conversation, I just want to remind everyone that it's important to subscribe to this YouTube channel. And if you do, don't forget to click the notification bell so that way every time a video is posted, we'll get it directly into your portal. So let's get started. Okay, my name is Ardain Isma, and I'm here this afternoon with a very interesting author. I am here with Dayan Mueller, Sarah Dayan Mueller, joining me from Chicago. And it's an honor for me to really have her because she has such a very intriguing title we're going to be talking about this evening. We're going to be talking about her title, A Home in 100 Places. So Sarah, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Okay, Sarah, would you please tell the viewers of CSMS Magazine who is Sarah Dayan Mueller?
Sure. So I am an author. I currently have 2 books out, published. My first book is called Greater Than the Still, and the second one, my most recent one, is called Home in 100 Places. And that book specifically is something that I hold very close to my heart, because it is based on the true life story of my late father's life. And in that story, he is a Jewish Egyptian spy who escapes Egypt, and he has a full life of espionage. And then ultimately he travels around the world, but unfortunately gets diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease later on in his life. So all the amazing memories that he once had, he slowly loses due to the disease.
So we're going to be talking about that for a second.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so is it fair to say, Sarah, this book can also be placed under the category of historical fiction in general?
Yes, it definitely is in the category of historical fiction, because the book it takes place starting in the 1930s, and it goes all throughout his whole life to the 2000s. So it goes through a lot of different eras in the 1900s, which is kind of cool because you get to see not only different locations throughout the world, but also the different time periods and historical events that are going on at that time. And it is historical fiction because although it is based on my dad's life, there are a few fictional parts to the story that are added in there to make it historical fiction.
So when you say here, you say that he raised in a Sephardic family in Egypt during the height of the growing resistance against Jews. So the protagonist, which is women, he maneuvers his way through childhood and into young adulthood with the guidance of his older cousin, Albert. And then when the two of them find themselves as key members of a Cairo-based Jewish spy ring, they must both make quick decisions that will ultimately determine the course of their lives. Is it fair to say that this story can also be like a fantasy?
Like a fantasy, you said?
Right, as a genre. Because I've interviewed a lot of fantasy writers. These particular aspect of the novelistic prose also derive from the type of intriguing passages like that.
Yeah. I wouldn't necessarily call it fantasy because the events that take place in the story are true. Everything that happened as a spy in Egypt during that time period were actual events that were happening. They were events that happened that my dad, took place in. So I wouldn't consider it fantasy, but more so historical fiction, but based heavily on true life events that happened in Egypt during that time. And going back to what you said about the Jewish population in Haiti, the beginning of the story actually takes place in Haiti.
Really?
Yeah, he was actually born there. My dad was actually born there. He was part of those families that you mentioned, the Jewish population that were mixed with Syrian, Lebanese, Egyptian. We do have some Syrian in our background too. So yeah, they were there growing up, I think, until he was about 8 years old. So his early childhood took place in Haiti. And then they did leave the country and then ended up in Egypt, where my grandfather's family is from. Yeah.
Quite intriguing.
Mm-hmm.
Quite interesting.
Yes. Very different. He's lived in many different places, which is part of the reason why I chose the name Home in 100 Places. Because he did live in so many different countries, so many different cities, and you could see just from the beginning of his life, starting off in Haiti and then moving somewhere like Egypt. So going all around the world.
But let me ask you this question here now. I know you must have gotten a lot of information from your dad to conceive this manuscript. Mm-hmm. So if you ever really felt some sort of an urge to go back and visit where it all begins?
Of course. Of course, some of these places are on the top of my list. Luckily, I did travel a lot with him and with my family. I think that was part of his lifestyle since he was born. He's been traveling around the world his whole life. So he gave that to me. Fortunately, I was able to travel around the world with him too. So many of the locations in the story, I've actually been to myself. A couple of them I have not been to yet, but definitely are at the top of my list to see, where he grew up and where also like my family and our ancestors are from too. I think writing this kind of story has made me very interested in knowing my own history and knowing, where my family comes from and their stories and how they got to where they are today.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting.
Yeah.
So that's on your father's side, but on your mother's side is because you were born in New York, right?
I was born in New York. Yeah, my mother's side is from the Philippines. So I've luckily been able to visit the Philippines a few times and visit my family there. But yeah, I come from quite a diverse background.
Isn't it fair to say that? And that reflects on your narrative too.
Yes, that's definitely something that I wanted to incorporate into the story because growing up, I was surrounded by so many different cultures, so many different languages. Between my parents, they spoke 6 different languages.
6?
6, yeah. Unfortunately, I only know English. I did not learn any of the other languages that they know, but I heard it growing up. So that's something that I wanted to put into the story because my mom and dad come from such different places in the world. And they both they both traveled around the world, and just their story of how their different cultures came together, and later
before we go back to Home in 100 Places.
Yes.
Let me ask you this question, Sarah. Is there a romance novel based on your folks' younger years?
There is a romance part of this novel in Home in 100 Places. Later on in the story, you get to see how they meet. They actually met in Hong Kong, out of all places, while they were both working there. So it's just, I always heard their stories of how they met and how they were both. My dad was working for a bank at the time. My mom was a nanny for an American couple there, and they just happened to meet in Hong Kong. So I thought it was so interesting to see how their lives crossed at just the right time. So I put that into the story and how their romance started from there.
That's interesting. Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Now, Could you please explain to the audience a little bit? You say that his older cousin, Albert, some sort of a plays a supporting role in the story, right?
Yes.
Okay, can you please give us just a little clue? We're not going to tell the plot now, just a
Yeah.
little clue of
Yeah.
Albert's role in the story.
Okay. So in the beginning of the story, Albert and his family, they also live in Haiti. And my dad's character, he had five sisters growing up. He never had any brothers. So he looked up to Albert, his cousin, as kind of like an older brother. They were very close, and they were also close in age. So that helped, like with growing up. But Albert plays a considerable role in this story because at some point they get separated. And because they were so close, Raymond's character, he spends a great deal of his life trying to find him again. So throughout the whole story, not only do you go on, trips around the world with Raymond as he's a spy and then changes his career, but you also go on a journey trying to see if Raymond is going to ever find Albert, especially before his Alzheimer's disease, takes away the memories of his family.
One thing you say that's really caught seriously my attention when you say that after more than 90 years of experiences, which seems to indicate that the character lives a very, very long life.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes, he fortunately did. He lived a great life, a long life, and it was filled with lots of experiences, lots of positive journeys. And that's something that I really wanted to portray in the story, especially because, he ultimately does have Alzheimer's disease. And a lot of people, when they get that diagnosis or they know somebody with that diagnosis, for them, it might seem like, okay, that's it. That person has Alzheimer's disease. That's the only defining point of their life. But I looked at it as the complete opposite of, there's so much that happened in his life before he had Alzheimer's disease. And Alzheimer's disease ended up only being such a tiny little fraction of his life. So I wanted this story to show how much more of his life was defined by everything else that happened before. He lost his memories to Alzheimer's disease. And I want other people, going through that experience or having somebody who, a loved one going through that experience to keep in mind all the positive things that happened before that diagnosis. Yeah.
And also how painful was it for you to write these chapters, or at least a couple chapters to deal with these later years,
Yeah. I mean, it was difficult. It was also fresh in my mind, and I think it was something that was in a way therapeutic for me, because I could finally sit down with my thoughts and my feelings about the whole process and the whole struggle that happened. My mom and I were caretakers for him. So we were with him all the time as he was going through, the ins and outs of the disease. So writing those parts of the book were, of course, it was very hard, but it was also helpful to deal with everything that I had stored inside. Finally, I could put it out, onto paper. And for me, that's how I express myself. So that was really something I needed to do for myself. And then once it was done, it was also nice to see that other people can read the story, and relate to it too.
Sarah, in doing so, you have managed to eternalize your father's life.
Mm-hmm.
100 years from now, anyone can pick up the story, can still see your dad very much alive. I lost my mom about a year ago. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
But something, they say that love transcends death. So when you lose a loved one, and in reality, you never really lose that person. You only lose the person when you forget about it. Because as long as you continue to remember the memories, the wonder years, the person will always be alive. And that's all I have been dealing with my mom's passing because we were very, very close. I know
Mhm.
exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, that is also something that I think is important for everybody to know, going through the loss of a loved one. And I'm sorry about,
That's okay.
your mom. But that's something that I wanted to do with writing this story is hold on to some of the memories that I knew that he couldn't anymore. Um, and also for my family. Growing up, a lot of my family, especially on my dad's side of the family,
Mhm.
they knew that I liked to write. So they always said, "Oh, it would be great if you wrote down his story because his story is something so unique." Um, and then finally, as I got older, I decided to actually do it. Now that it's actually done, I would love to give it to my son when he gets older. He's only a little toddler right now, but you know, he's going to be able to read the story one day and get to know who his grandfather was.
That's
So I
exactly
think
what
that's
I just
something very
said. Maybe
special.
100 years from now, because you know
Yeah.
what? A picture fades over time.
Hmm.
Words, can live more than 1,000 years.
Yeah, that is very true. Hmm.
Yeah. And you know
Yeah.
something, Sarah? I'm very proud of you for have been able to conceive such a wonderful manuscript based on someone so dear to your heart. And let's switch this for a second because of the purpose of time.
Sure.
You said you just mentioned you had been thinking about writing that story. When did you really realize at some point in my life I am going to be an author?
I think I mean, for me writing is just something I have to do. There's no option there for me.
Since
Whether
high school
it's
or maybe since
since I could read and write. Yeah. Uh-huh. That was something that even if nothing came out of it, even if I never published a single word, I was going to write for myself no matter what. So that was, you know, I always had that dream of one day I want to be an author. Um, and I've been, writing stories here and there, writing books that I never did anything with. But I think it was only within the past 5 to 10 years that I started to take it a little bit more seriously. I did other things in the writing field, like travel journalism and freelance journalism, but I never focused so much on publishing books. So within the past few years is when I decided, okay, let me try, let me see, get into this part of the industry. And then with this book specifically, I got more serious with it really when the pandemic started. Of course, I was home,
Mhm,
a lot more often, had a lot more time. So
mhm.
that's when I really got serious about that.
So let me ask you this: so how long did it take you to conceive this manuscript?
This one was about 6 months from start to finish.
Really?
Yeah, 6 months. It was, I took a couple of months off in between. I was in the process of moving, so I didn't write during that time. But once I got settled again, then I got back to writing. For me, though, this story was actually pretty easy to write because I knew what was going to happen next. It's based on my father's life. So I knew for the most part, what I wanted to include. Um, and I knew the character. It was him. So it was very, very easy for me to write it.
So, yeah, just for the purpose of time, Sarah, I have a couple of questions I'd like to ask you. Because I know writers also read a lot.
Yeah.
Because we read a lot, so we have some preferences when it comes to other writers, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if I were to ask you a question, Sarah, who you would consider as your preferred author?
That's a tough one
Everyone
because
says the same thing,
it's
right?
a tough one.
But it's the
Yeah.
same thing.
I feel like some people have like that one author, no matter what, hands down is their favorite. For me, I feel like it changes depending on the type of mood I'm in, of what I'm reading. Recently, though, I think because Home in 100 Places is historical fiction, I actually got very interested in other historical fiction novels. So Kristen Hanna recently, I got into her work. I recently read The Four Winds, which is one of her latest novels. And I just really connected with how she writes and the emotional aspects of her storytelling. And because I've been in a historical fiction kick recently, I would say something along those lines is up in my favorites currently. Yeah.
Currently,
yeah. Currently, it might change, but she's still going to be one of my favorites.
For now. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, because I know you're a mom, and you have a husband also, tender. If I were to ask you this question now, what is your preferred cuisine, and what is your preferred cuisine?
Cuisine. I would. That also depends on my mood, I think. I love Mexican food.
You do?
Yeah, I actually lived in Southern California for a while, so specifically the Mexican food in Southern California.
You cook that in the house for your husband?
I can't cook it not nearly as well as I would get in Southern California. And we like Filipino food too. Going back to our culture, so Filipino food is up there also.
What is a traditional Filipino cuisine?
One of the popular dishes is like adobo, chicken adobo, or pork adobo. Yeah, and of course everybody says their moms make the best one. So it also depends on the region. Regions do it a little bit differently, but yeah.
Okay. I have a last question, Sarah. Okay. Yeah. I feel like we can talk forever because we have a Haiti connection right here now.
Yes, we do.
We talk forever. But if I were to ask you a question, if there is someone like you who plans on writing a story, based on a loved one who passed away, but just like you, who would want to immortalize that loved one. So what lesson would you give that person?
I think I would say enjoy the process of it. Don't rush if you don't have to rush, take your time learning about that person's life, try to find details, like little details about that person's life, like the brand of coffee they like to drink, or, the specific park they like to take a walk in, just to give, you as a writer more details into that person's life. And then the reader will also understand that person's life too. So I think it's really an act of love to, want to write a story like that. So take your time with it and really enjoy it, because you're going to learn a lot about that person while you're writing the story.
While writing it, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's interesting.
Yeah.
So with that, Sarah, I'm just going to say it's been such a pleasure.
It was a pleasure talking to you as well.
Okay, so we'll do it again.